In the dusty scrolls of ancient China's history, there is a name that once echoed loudly across kingdoms, inspiring followers and frightening rulers. Today, that name is barely remembered outside scholarly circles. His ideas have been overshadowed by the giants of Confucianism and Taoism, yet in his own time, he was a force so influential that kings sought his counsel, and armies hesitated at his presence. His name was Mozi, a man who dared to imagine a world ruled not by favoritism or bloodlines, but by fairness, reason, and a love so universal that it made no distinction between friend and stranger. In an age where warlords battled for power and states bled each other dry, Mozi's voice was an anomaly, calling for the end of aggressive wars, for merit over birthright, and for the equal value of all human lives. This is the story of his philosophy, his struggle, and why his ideas might be more necessary now than ever before. Mozi was born sometime around 470 BCE, in the Warring States period of China, a time when the country was not a unified empire but a collection of rival kingdoms constantly at war. This was an era of chaos and ambition, where rulers saw conquest as the path to glory, and human life was expendable in the name of political power. Philosophers were not rare in this period. It was an age of ideas as much as an age of swords. Confucius had died decades earlier, leaving a legacy of hierarchical order, ritual, and the importance of moral virtue in rulers. Taoist thinkers spoke of harmony with nature and retreating from worldly chaos. But Mozi did not fit neatly into either of these traditions. He was a craftsman by origin, a man from the working class, not the nobility, and perhaps it was this perspective that allowed him to see the flaws in the political systems of his time more clearly than those who lived in palaces. One of Mozi's most revolutionary ideas was what he called the Jian'ari, often translated as impartial care for universal love. To modern ears, universal love might sound like a vague moral slogan, but in Mozi's time, it was a radical political principle. Society then was built on favoritism. Rulers favored their relatives, ministers promoted their own clans, and ordinary people prioritized their own villages over outsiders. To Mozi, this was the root of endless conflict. If you value your own state more than others, you will invade theirs for gain. If you value your family above others, you will treat outsiders unjustly. Mozi argued that only by treating everyone's needs as equal, friend and stranger alike, could true peace be achieved. If people regarded other states as they regard their own, he reasoned, who would raise arms against them? This was not a call for sentimental kindness. Mozi's universal love was deeply practical. He believed that moral principles should serve the welfare of the people. If partiality leads to war and suffering, impartiality leads to stability and prosperity. His was a philosophy that could be applied in governance, economics, and everyday life. In fact, Mozi's school was less about abstract metaphysics and more about concrete action. His followers were like a disciplined organization, traveling to troubled states to mediate conflicts, build fortifications for defense, and advise rulers on ethical governance. Imagine a group of philosopher engineers who could talk peace with a king in the morning and design a defensive wall by the afternoon. That was the Mohist movement. Mozi also believed deeply in meritocracy. In his time, political positions were inherited through aristocracy. The son of a minister became a minister, the son of a general became a general, regardless of competence. Mozi saw this as wasteful and dangerous. He argued that positions of power should be given to those with talent and virtue, not those with noble blood. A ruler's responsibility was to appoint capable people for the benefit of the state, and this principle extended from the highest minister to the lowest village leader. For Mozi, loyalty to skill and morality was far more important than loyalty to family or tradition. In this way, his philosophy anticipated modern ideas of equal opportunity and governance based on ability. But perhaps the most striking and controversial part of Mozi's philosophy was his opposition to aggressive war. In the Warring States period, warfare was not only common but celebrated as a legitimate tool of statecraft. Conquerors were admired, and the glory of expansion outweighed the value of human life. Mozi, however, saw war as the greatest theft of all. It robbed lives, resources, and moral integrity. He argued that just as theft and murder are crimes when committed by individuals, so too are they crimes when committed by states under the banner of conquest. He did not oppose all war, he allowed for defensive wars to protect the innocent, but he denounced expansionist campaigns as immoral and counterproductive. To the rulers who sought to justify conquest as benefiting the people, Moses' answer was simple: if killing one man is wrong, how can killing tens of thousands be right? In his lifetime, Moses' ideas were not just words on paper. He and his followers actively intervened to prevent wars. One famous story tells of how Mozi traveled to the state of Chu to stop an invasion of the small state of Song. Knowing he couldn't fight an army, he instead reasoned with the king of Chu, explaining how war would bring more harm than gain. He also demonstrated defensive tactics so effective that Chu realized the invasion would be too costly. In the end, the war was avoided, not through armies clashing, but through one man's argument and foresight. This kind of hands-on philosophy, saving lives through both reasoning and technical skill, was what made Mozi unique among ancient thinkers. Moses' philosophy was also grounded in a belief in heaven's will. Unlike the Taoists, who saw the universe as indifferent, and unlike the Confucians, who emphasized ritual continuity, Mozi believed that heaven actively desired human welfare. Heaven, to Mozi, was like a benevolent ruler who wanted all people treated equally. Therefore, moral governance aligned with heaven's intent. This theological foundation strengthened his moral arguments: if impartial love was heaven's will, then to practice favoritism or aggression was not only socially harmful but cosmically wrong. Of course, Moses' radical ideas faced strong opposition. The Confucians criticized his rejection of elaborate rituals and his utilitarian approach to morality. To them, Moses' call for universal love ignored the natural bonds between family members, which they saw as the foundation of society. Legalists dismissed his moral appeals as naive, believing that power and control were the only real forces in politics. And in the end, the warring states period did not heed Moses' call for peace. War continued, and the Qin dynasty would eventually unify China through conquest, not compassion. Over time, Mohism declined, overshadowed by Confucianism, which became the dominant ideology for centuries. Yet, to judge Mozi by the political outcome of his time would be to miss the point of his enduring value. His philosophy speaks directly to the moral dilemmas of every era, including ours. In a world still plagued by wars, political corruption, and inequality, Moses' insistence on impartial care challenges us to rethink how we define justice. His demand for meritocracy asks us to confront the nepotism and favoritism that still poison institutions today. And his unwavering stance against aggressive war forces us to question the morality of violence carried out in the name of national interest. Imagine if Moses' principles were applied to modern geopolitics. Universal love would mean that a famine in another country is as urgent as one at home. Meritocracy would mean that leaders are chosen for their competence, not their popularity or family connections. Opposition to aggressive war would mean that conflicts are resolved through negotiation and cooperation rather than through bombs and blockades. These may sound idealistic, but Moses' own life shows that they are not impossible. He prevented wars, influenced rulers, and built systems that protected the vulnerable, not because he had more power than kings, but because he had the courage to speak truths that others feared to voice. Moses' story is also a reminder that ideas can be as powerful as armies. In his time, his movement was organized, disciplined, and ready to act. His followers didn't just debate in academies, they traveled to battlefields to stop bloodshed. They were philosophers in the service of life, not just words. In a sense, Mozi proved that moral courage, combined with practical skill, could alter the course of history, even if history later forgot his name. Today, when we speak of great philosophers, Mozi is too often absent from the conversation. Yet his voice, if heard, could offer a moral compass for a world struggling with division, selfishness, and violence. His philosophy reminds us that true greatness lies not in conquering others but in protecting them, not in favoring our own, but in valuing all, not in expanding our power, but in expanding our compassion. Universal love over war, this was Moses' message, and it remains as urgent in the 21st century as it was in the 5th century BCE. To embrace his vision is to reject the seductive lie that peace can be built on the suffering of others. It is to accept that the fate of strangers is bound to our own. And perhaps most importantly, it is to believe that reason, justice, and care are not luxuries of peace but the very tools by which peace is forged. Moses' voice comes to us from a distant age, yet it speaks with startling clarity to our own. In a time when nations still fight for dominance, when leaders still rise through favoritism, and when the suffering of others is too easily ignored, Moses' challenge stands before us. Will we continue to live in a world of partiality and war, or will we dare to imagine and build a world of fairness, merit, and universal love? The answer lies not in the weapons we wield, but in the values we choose to defend.